as currently designed, this project goes through, it could be a 100-year sit-in. You know, we need to make changes a lot quicker than that, but even it's certainly a sit-in that could last for 20 years. And if we haven't done something remarkable by then it's kind of too late. But so for, you know, to me personally, it's an expensive project. So that's why, you know, recruiting others and sharing it. And, you know, I think there's something about owning something that gets in the way of something of the oil and gas business. I think it's fun. It's fun. And it's funny.
Artist and environmental activist Eliza Evans joins John and Scoop for a wide-ranging discussion about her art and her environmental project, All the Way to Hell. Eliza owns the mineral rights to 3 acres in Oklahoma. She hopes to sell or donate hundreds or thousands of deeds to her mineral rights, making it difficult or impossible for fracking interests to negotiate a lease.
Welcome to another episode of Plutopia. Our guest today is Eliza Evans. Eliza is an artist who experiments with sculpture, print, video, and textiles to identify disconnections and absurdities in the social, economic, and ecological systems, and there's plenty of those. The initial parameters of each work are carefully researched and then evolve as a result of interaction with people, time, and weather. So we'll be talking about that. And I should also mention that in a past life, Eliza was an academic focused on economic, social development, and entrepreneurship. Eliza, welcome.
Hey, thank you, John.
I started to say more about your past life, and then I realized the past life is in the past.
True. Yeah.
Do you miss that stuff? Academic work?
No, I miss some of the people, for sure. But no, I think, look, academia was really good to me, especially, you know, UT Austin was really good to me. I learned a lot. I had really great experiences. But towards the end, I just kept hearing the same things over and over again. And I wasn't through, you know, exploring. And no one is more surprised than I am that, you know, my vehicle for exploration became art. It was a complete accident. So.
Were you doing art in your spare time while you were an academic, or did you come to it completely fresh?
There was a transition for sure. I think I'm not a frustrated artist. It's not like I always wanted to be an artist, and I finally created the room to do that. That is not at all the case. What happened was, after I left the UT Austin, I was running a nonprofit that was still doing things highly analogous to what the IC2 Institute did. You know, working with startups, working with universities.
And that was in Center, right?
That's right. Yeah. And
I still have a lot of notes on in Center.
Yeah.
We should disclose that we worked together back then.
That's true. We worked together on a lot of things. And so I couldn't be more delighted that we're kind of reconnecting here.
Right on.
Yeah, it was, because of my impeccable timing, I left my almost job for life at IC2. You know, it wasn't tenured, but I could have stayed there. But I left the same week Lehman Brothers collapsed to go work on InCenter. And I think to this day, if I had started working on InCenter, 12 to 18 months before or after that, I'd probably still be doing it. But just to launch something new that required a lot of public and university input and cooperation when everybody was panicked about how to keep the lights on and faculty paid, and the timing was less than ideal. But it it went for about 4.5 years, and then it just finally didn't need to exist anymore. So I shuttered it. And I was doing but how I got to art was I was doing a very number crunchy project that lasted for about 6 months and took a lot of focus. By the end of it, I was really kind of burned out, and I thought, I know I have a right side to my brain. I better go and discover it, before it liquefies. And so I just enrolled in Austin Community College in a drawing 101 class. And and so that was the start, and I knew something was there. I had no idea it would take over my life. And what really cinched it for me was, for a very long period of time, from probably the late 90s to 2014-ish, I dabbled in short-term equity and options trading just as a hobby. And it really prepared me to be an artist in a lot of ways. But one of them is I would design my trading programs. And the best thing you can do when you have a trading program is to walk away during the trading day. Leave your computer. And so one way I did that to distract myself is I would go to these life drawing sessions in Austin. And so that was, big chunks of time where I would be completely engrossed in something else. And so that was the start of, learning what's kind of seen as the craft end of art. And it's so extraordinarily difficult, but conceptually, I really loved it because you really learn, you don't know how to draw an eye. You really have never looked at an eye. And so getting it, and so what most people draw are these little representations of eyes instead of something that, looks like an eye in 2D space. And so I just kept pulling on that thread, and took more courses at Austin Community College, spent almost 2 years in Santa Fe, kind of working with private mentors. Then I decided, even though the last thing I needed was another degree, I wanted to condense that growing as an artist. So I went ahead and I got an MFA at a little school outside of New York City that's part of the SUNY system. It's called SUNY Purchase College, which is basically the arts campus for the SUNY system. So it's about 2,000 students, mostly undergrads, but some grad students in theater and dance and music. And so it was a really great place to be for 2 years.
I like what you said about stepping away from the project, because in my own work, I'll get stuck. And if I can just leave the studio, walk out, and do anything else for a period of time, it inevitably leads to something maybe completely different that I hadn't thought of. And it's just a great approach to doing your work. If you just sit there and pound away at it constantly, it doesn't seem to get you anywhere.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think even, as an academic, a lot of how I processed information was physical. I'd go for a walk or go for a run or out in nature, just sit there, even if I brought work with me. And I think it's a critical part of a digestion process.
So did this bring a real sense of transformation? Did you start to feel like you were kind of in a really different space and a different mindset as a result of this shifting of gears or changing of cars, I guess?
Yeah. Yes and no. For a while, I considered it a really dramatic, nonsensical shift. And it took a lot of time to see some of the threads. I didn't have, early on, I had no sense of how similar artists and entrepreneurs are, because I didn't know any, or I didn't know many artists, and I certainly didn't know many artists who had committed to it full time, and had really struggled being an artist. But as I met more and more, I thought, oh, this type, I think they're cut from the same cloth that really good entrepreneurs and really good scientists and engineers. It's a very similar personality type. And unfortunately, I think some artists don't see that. They see scientists and engineers as the opposite, and I think that has to do because they have very little experience of what science or engineering is. And I think bad scientists and engineers are very much like bad artists, kind of cookie cutter cookbook. But otherwise, people really romanced by unanswered questions, or problem solvers, or they're just such peculiar people. They're coming at problems so obliquely, they're going to come up with that unique treatment of the problem, whether it's is art or a new product. So it's all in how they're asking the question.
I wanted to ask a little bit about your time in Santa Fe.
Sure.
You said you were studying with some mentors there. Can you say a little bit more about that, about the kinds of things you were studying?
Oh, sure. Well, I went there to study in the writer's studio, and Tony Ryder is certainly a highly respected and fairly well-known, in that area of art, artist for doing classical realism. So this is old school. So this is painting and drawing from, live models, 40 hours a week. And I did that for 9 months. And I learned so much from him and my peers there, even though that's not the kind of work I do now. It was really rigorous but a really open, loving environment. And, part of the importance of being in Santa Fe is it was not Austin. I had some sort of identity in Austin that I just really wanted to separate myself from, at least temporarily, and have the freedom to do and be something else for a while. I also, I began to meet, professional artists, because there's so many there, and of artists of all types, and some very well established and well known in Santa Fe, and some who are struggling to make their way. And this is when Meow Wolf was just barely getting off the ground. And so there was that younger art community that was just beginning to come up when I was there. And there were a lot of things I loved about Santa Fe, and I think every person who moves there says something similar. It's very hard to find your community. Socially, it's very fragmented. In terms of wealth, age. It's a very old town, just demographically, and I don't think that bodes well for its future. They're really trying to bend over backwards to attract young professional families, but it's hard to do when there's no work. But it's incredibly beautiful, and so it was, I think, exactly the kind of transition I needed, but I had no idea what I was transitioning to. I mean, it wasn't until a year or two ago that I could say the words, I'm an artist, without choking on them, because it just seems so pretentious. But that is, in fact, what I am. That's what I spend most of my time doing.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about Santa Fe. I've spent time in Santa Fe, and I lived in Boulder for a while. And Boulder is a place where, as far as I know, there's not a lot of artists in Boulder, and not high degree of creativity. I know there's a lot of Buddhists there, and there's an Europa Institute and so forth, but it felt like, people were mostly like charging up the trails and skiing and, doing all kinds of really physical stuff, and that it was great for that, but it didn't feel, either I was missing it or there wasn't the kind of like creative weirdness that we're so used to here in Austin, which made me kind of want to come back. But Santa Fe, I had a sense, had to be different, but I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I really had the sense that there was a lot of like interesting juices flowing through Santa Fe that I had missed. And actually we're talking about going there soon, so hopefully I can plug in and unearth some of those things. But I guess another question for you is like, did you really enjoy living in Santa Fe? Was that?
I did, and I really considered staying there, like potentially forever. And
that's kind of what I was wondering about. I mean,
yeah,
I know a lot of people.
I was trying it on and see if it fit. In my first year, I rented a furnished apartment, which was like perfectly located, incredible views, very reasonably priced. And then, but I missed, I wanted a little bit more room. I wanted to have, my stuff. So I moved, all my household stuff to Austin, and I rented, a house in a great neighborhood. I have terrific neighbors. So there was that. But then by the end of that year, I realized to get where I want, wherever it was that I was going, I just needed, I was impatient. I couldn't find, the density of experience I was looking for. And there, I know tons of creative people in Santa Fe who either they have to make it work for family or other reasons. And then I know a lot of people who are, there are a lot of dabblers and hangers on, and it's just, it just lacks the snap that Austin has. That I mean, I don't think it's wrong to be ambitious. There are a lot of, even if it's, you want to develop the best spiritual practice that you're able, the Upaya Institute is there, and that was a real source of intellectual stimulation for me.
Yeah, I've been to Upaya before.
Yeah. So there's a lot there.
Powerful.
And I think for people who do consider making it home, I think you have to give it at least 3 years. I was there for 2. So maybe I gave up too early, but I think the way things have worked out since then, I'm real comfortable with that decision. But there was also, Santa Fe for me was never going to be a place where I'd be comfortable calling home for a reason you guys might understand. However bad the allergies are in Austin, they are much worse in Santa Fe. They have all the juniper, and then they have this other plant called chamisa, which personally wanted to kill me. So that means for 3 or 4 months out of the year, it was unlivable for me. So that was I have to say that was a big factor too. So who knew, New York State was much friendlier to my Austin origin allergies.
I spent a lot of time in Santa Fe, starting in high school when we would go up to go skiing. And I've gone many times just over the years because I enjoyed the place, but I came away every time knowing that I was nothing more than a commodity when I visited in Santa Fe. Tourism seems to be the big thing in Santa Fe, unless you get out into some other part of the community, but just visiting, you're a commodity basically.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I think that's the case even if you move there. You've got to, because there's so many people who do buy houses, who do spend a lot of time there, but they never invest in the community. So it's and I think it's for the size of a town it is, which I believe is around 65,000 people, it has an enormous amount to offer. It's amazing that almost any intellectual urge you have, it can be scratched. But it's kind of too small to absorb, you know, the second homeowners and, you know, the people who are there who just want to live there and maybe not be the most productive contributors to the society. And then you have the immense disparities in wealth. So it just, you know, if it were a town of 300,000, it might be a little different, but it's not. It's a small town. So so yeah, you are a commodity until proven otherwise in Santa Fe. And I it's sad, but I'm not sure that approach is completely unjustified.
Did you ever think about coming back to Austin?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I still own a house there that's rented out, and I just hung on to it because I love the house. It's perfect for me. It's in a great neighborhood. I would never be able to afford it again. But if I'm going to spend part of my life in New York State, specifically the city or close by, then I want to be in a different place. And Austin has, unfortunately, a lot of the deficits of New York City. It's not cheap. It's hard to get around. You know, I miss Austin, and I'm really torn with, you know, potentially selling my one remaining house there. But I think that's just what has to happen, because I would like to spend my life in nature and in greenery. And so that, I don't know where that will be, but it's not going to be Central Texas.
Well, I have a feeling that Austin misses Austin because it's changed just this year. So many things that were vibrant and exciting are gone. And it's just because of what has been happening to us. But hopefully something new and exciting will take that place.
And I think there's enough going on there. And while it's crazy expensive, it's not New York City. So I think there is a chance. Who knows what Austin will look like in 5 years? But I'm hopeful for it. But I just heard on the radio today in New York City, there are 230,000 businesses in New York City were effectively put out of business by COVID. That's extraordinary. So, you know, I think New York City is certainly, it's already changing. Yeah. I don't know if people ran away from Austin, the city center, because of COVID. I know a lot of people from New York City who ran to Austin. So it's still a place where you know, interesting, dynamic, creative people want to land when either they've been burned up too many times in California, or, you know, there's just one more burden of living in New York City. I think, you know, Austin's still a destination for those folks, which is a great thing.
Yeah, I've noticed some creative people moving here, and I don't know, Joe Rogan, the podcaster, has moved his thing to Austin and is working from here. He says, well, it's right in the middle of the country. I can be as close to New York as I am to California.
Okay.
Which is another point. Maybe we should change now and talk a little bit about your art, some of the art that you've actually created. And we were going to talk about your recent or your latest piece, but before that, let's talk about some of the things that you've done. For instance, Time Machine. Could you explain how Time Machine works?
Sure. Yeah, it's Time Machine could not be goofier or more direct. It was just a little experiment I did last year when I was a resident at the Chautauqua Institution, which is very well known in the Northeast, but less well known other places. It's a site of learning and education and enrichment and religious exploration in way, way Western New York. And it, it was funded by early industrialists. And so it looks like a little movie set with these, Victorian houses. And it's kind of like summer camp for rather well-to-do white people. They're really trying to change that. Their current director is LGBT, really trying to bring in programming that talks to a multitude of audiences. And the art residency is part of that, institutional refocus. And so there I am on the grounds of this rather Tony place, which also happens to be in that county is the location of the very first natural gas well to be drilled in the United States, which if I recall correctly, was about 1828. So this is a very fossil fuel rich part of the country, even now, or especially now. And so I thought, just as an experiment, I got this really cheap plastic greenhouse off of Amazon, and I just put it up in a yard, and I put myself in it for a summer day and kind of used it as a scenario generator. However hot it got inside the greenhouse is sort of like a magic 8-ball, like anticipating how successful we will be in curbing climate change. And so what I underappreciated is the toll this would take on my body. I wanted to stay there for a full 8 hours. I'm a runner, so I have one of those fancy watches, and I could, at least monitor my heart rate. And I had to leave. I had to leave this greenhouse or end up in the hospital. And because my health insurance is like that of every other artist, I didn't want to do that. So even though this was not necessarily a public thing, where it was on a lawn, people could observe it. And so the local paper came by and they interviewed me, and my fellow residents started posting about it on social media. And so I'm like, oh, this is a thing. And that was the question I had, is this a thing? And basically torturing myself made other people really uncomfortable.
It sounds like you were successful in your experiment. You proved exactly what you set out to do.
Well, yeah, but it was an open question. And so a couple things came out of this one day, which is the following week, I actually set up the same exact experiment, but in a much more public context of an arts and craft fair. Because I thought, who goes to an arts and craft fair? They aren't necessarily looking for a new leather belt. They're looking for they're looking for a novel aesthetic experience. And that is what I was going to offer them. And so instead of just me on the inside, I offered people the opportunity to sit inside with me as if it were an amusement park ride. But they had to sign a totally legitimate, medical waiver. And then, we would sit inside, some people for 10 seconds, some people I talked to one guy for 20 minutes. And, I had people hug me at the after we would leave the little greenhouse, and people would hug me. No one ever hugged me over one of my paintings or my prints. And I thought, oh, this is really something. And so at Chautauqua, I met a university art gallery director, and he has commissioned me to replicate this project. It would have been this coming fall, but for reasons we all know, it's been delayed until the spring to do the first version of that, me sitting in the greenhouse by myself on a hot day on the university campus at this fairly public intersection. And I hope to work with, the sports science people and the nursing, students to be all wired up and get
multidisciplinary.
Yeah, which is, John, does that sound familiar to
Yeah,
what
it
I was
does.
doing in my past? And so I absolutely love this idea. And, of course, I'm disappointed it's been delayed, but, it's going to happen. This is at the Austin Peay State University in Tennessee, in Clarksville, Tennessee. And the state of Tennessee is funding, centers of excellence in all their state, run universities. And so for Austin Peay, arts is one. They have one other in science. I can't remember which one. But so this is a very highly regarded, well-funded program. And if you look at the visiting artists they get, they're giants. And so for me
Wow.
to be considered among those people, I am just so pleased. And also, it's Austin Peay State University, so they're scrappy, and I appreciate that too. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I have a couple of other opportunities to do something similar, but nothing is nailed down. I think we'll have to be well on the other side of COVID before something like that really materializes. But I think I see this as an ongoing project.
What was the temperature in there?
I got up to 113.
Wow, that'll kill
And
COVID.
yeah, and yeah, exactly. And my heart rate got within 2 beats of my maximum heart rate, and
Wow.
I was sitting stock still. So, uh, yeah, I'm actually, my peers, my other fellow residents were keeping an eye on me. But yeah, this is not something to be attempted alone.
Sounds like you
And this
created
was
a
like,
snapshot of what the entire planet can expect to experience if the climate deniers win.
Precisely. Or if we don't come to a screeching halt with some things, we know we're going to suffer some of these consequences. And it's obviously much
some
more
people are already
complicated.
suffering some of these consequences.
Well, right. And I mean, heat is an obvious uncomfortable consequence, but I think water availability is going to be a much more pressing issue. And then, of course, the unpredictable weather. And I think these times we're living in, we're finding really unexpected advocates and heroes, whether it's the Park Service or Teen Vogue or the Post Office. I think insurance actuaries are actually going to be some of our heroes, because they're going to force on business a rude awakening, because insurance companies don't like to lose money. And so where government policy is currently failing, the market may address. I mean, we need a much bigger solution, but I think big business knows the pickle that they're in, or that we're all in, and they're preparing for it, even if the government isn't, forcing them to pay attention.
I've read in a number of places people theorizing that the next big series of big wars will not be over oil or gas, but over water.
Well, yeah, I think that's been a credible thesis for some time. I think in poor countries, that is exactly what's happening. I don't see that happening in the U.S. as yet. But even in, just to go back to New Mexico, I don't know if this is, I know in Taos, you were not allowed to collect rainwater from your roof. Everything had to flow onto the ground because the water situation was so desperate. They needed every drop.
They rely on the groundwater that soaks in.
Right. The water, because they had they have actually had some killer snow years, because I did ski when I was there and I loved it. I didn't learn how to ski until I was in my 40s. And I realized I've wasted my youth not knowing how to ski. But one year it was just sad and pathetic snow-wise. And then the next year they get, colossal snows. And so it's really hard to plan. What kind of infrastructure do you build, and how robust is it? And, in a state where, New Mexico, I think, is the second poorest state in the country, with Mississippi being first. So they have lots of needs.
One of your projects that I've been looking at on your website is oil and gas related. Could you tell us about your mineral rights project?
Sure.
That was just fascinating.
Yeah, this is definitely a work in progress. So a lot of my work has to do with the environment and climate change and our relationship with nature. And so in this later work, this last work, which I call All the Way to Hell, it really brings together my economic sociology background and weds it to my art practice, because I found out a little over a year ago, I own a little piece of property in Oklahoma, a place where I've never been, because my great-grandfather spent some time there. He spent 20 years of his professional life there. But he went there, worked there, and then left and went back to where he came from. So, no deep roots in Oklahoma, but I still have this mineral property. And my great aunt gave it to me a long time ago. I just never knew about it until my mother, gave me the deed. She's like, "Here, by the way, this is yours." And because I had begun to get mail from landmen, and landmen are contractors who work for oil, fossil fuel companies to go sew up mineral rights and gain access to mineral rights. And in one respect, the law really protects landowners and mineral property owners, and in one respect they don't. So they, in theory, they can't just drill anywhere. They need permission. And they need to pay you for access to your mineral rights, and they have to, and usually that takes the form of royalties from whatever they find. But I'm an environmentalist. I believe in climate change, and it struck me that so much of the resistance, whether it's the pipelines are being protested, all over the country, not just the marquee events, but it's already been drilled. It's already out of the ground, and the cat is out of the bag. Wouldn't it be better if we could just keep the oil and gas where it is? And so I own these minerals. They are mine. I thought, oh, well, I could wash my hands of the situation and just sell them off to somebody else and let them assume the ethical, wrestle with it ethically. But I'm like, no, this is, as someone committed to a desirable future, I need to see what I can do to keep these minerals from being exploited, with basically all of oil and gas law arrayed against me. So simply, a small mineral rights holder like me cannot say no. A drilling unit is a square mile, which is 640 acres. I own rights to 3 acres. And the landman just has to sew up half of that land, and then he can force the remaining half into what's called a forced pool. And so they have to pay you, if they drill my, or they extract from my property. The rig doesn't have to be on the property with horizontal drilling these days. The rig can be, 2 miles away. But if they extract from my property, they do have to pay me. Typically, I think the rate is 12.5%. So I'm not really satisfied with not being able to say no. So I'm looking at several options. And the first that I'm exploring now is selling my minerals to as many as people as possible. And what this does is it adds to the landman's burden. He has to go through and trace title for every single one of these people back to patent. And that really means back to the first white settler whose land was registered in the county clerk's office. Land ownership before that is not acknowledged, or land ownership or occupation. And this can be a really complicated task because, because this land before horizontal drilling, a lot of, land in the U.S. was worth, or minerals in the U.S. were worth nothing. And now they're worth so much. And then you have to trace it all the way back. Did everybody have a will, and was it adjudicated? And so it can be very expensive. And so when a landman sees a highly fractionalized property, which is what happens when things are just handed down generation to generation, often they'll just walk away. They'll just say, this is a pain, I'm not going to do it. And of course, the only way they would do it is if it's worthwhile. If there's something they think something is underneath that's really worth, getting to. But they still, if I, sell it, transfer, using some vehicle, I could sell it, I could give it as gifts, there's some vehicle of transfer to as many people as allowable. And my understanding is there's no ceiling to what is legally allowable. So I could divide up this 3 acres to 1 million people. Now the costs of doing that are enormous. Because, states with, oil and gas resources don't make this easy for non-oil and gas folks. So, and I'm using my property as a test case. And we'll see how this works. It's just started. I hope to, complete this project by the end of the year. I already have a lead on the second property in a different state, which is an entirely different legal regime. So there's very little efficiency of scale here, which is kind of the point, because there's so much friction built in the system. And it's also a very arcane area of law. So, I'm having to pay for specialized legal talent, but it's so worth it to me for this project, which is, even though it's just getting started, has already been recognized, at least in the New York art world sense. And I'm hoping that this is a prototype. This is a model that either for other projects, I can either fold into this into All the Way to Hell, or that people can just, read about it and do it on their own, if they're landowners elsewhere. Oh, and just a word about the name. All the Way to Hell comes from the ad coelum doctrine, which means ad coelum means all the way to heaven. And so in the US has a very unique property regime in which private individuals own the land all the way to heaven, meaning the air rights, and all the way to hell, in theory, the center of the earth. Now, when air travel came about, then somebody had to decide air rights end at 400 feet, a little bit higher in urban areas. But in terms of owning what's underneath, there is no limit And right now, frackers can, I believe, can frack up to 15,000 feet. And it's only going to get deeper and deeper and deeper because there are just, they know it's there. You know, under the Marcellus Shale in the Northeast, there's the Utica Shale. They knew it was there. They knew the approximate size of it. They just couldn't get to it until very recently. So the technology is amazing. But also, you know, we're well aware of the consequences.
But it
Well,
can be so expensive. I mean, it depends on oil prices. If the oil prices are relatively low, then it's more expensive than it's worth to go deeper like that.
Well, now is a really, this might be, you know, I was going to do this project regardless of what happened, but the timing actually has worked out rather well for a couple of reasons. The early fracking generations, like, you know, Chesapeake, these big companies, they're losing their shirts. They are going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And a lot of environmentalists celebrate this, but I gotta tell you, if there's anything worse than a fracking well, it's an abandoned fracking well. They emit much more unregulated, unmeasured, undealt with methane than wells that are tended to. So the economic collapse of the fracking industry is not necessarily a good thing, because methane, which is fracking's biggest problem in my, you know, a lot of people worry about the poisoning of groundwater, the earthquakes from, they take the water that they fracked with and they dispose it in another well that causes earthquakes. Those are all big problems, but I think the worst problem is the methane emissions. You know, methane, AKA natural gas. And those pictures you see of fracked wells on fire, that is, they're flaring, they're burning off the natural gas, which converts methane to CO2. It's a terrible calculus. Methane in the first 20 or 30 years is 80 times more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. So you really don't want methane going up. But when you convert it to CO2, yes, it's less potent, but it stays there forever. So methane degrades over time, CO2 does not. So these fracked wells leak, period. Maybe there's a technological solution to that, but no one's really motivated to do that, given the already very expensive, you know, the costs of this type of extraction. And, you know, with the current administration, the regulations are getting looser, not more strict. So, yeah, I just don't think fracking as currently practiced is something we need at all in our lives. If it will come back to bite us, and it is. So, you know, I think, you know, we have to have so many solutions, and this all the way to hell is disruptive. It's annoying. Is it a comprehensive solution? No. But I think it might, if we do have a change in administration, it could potentially have a bigger impact, because I believe, if I understood Joe Biden correctly, what he would like to do, what he said is no more fracking on public land. That really means federal land. I think the states can do what they want, but with their state-owned land. So no more fracking on public land, no new leases. Don't increase the rig count of public land. And so if fracking does come back, I don't think oil and gas is going to stay where it is price-wise. So if there's no more fracking on public land, that's going to put more pressure on owners of private land, with some opportunity for smallholders like me, but also, you know, it puts, you know, private mineral owners into a bigger bind ethically than they already are. And so what's happening now is the majors, Exxon et al., are going in and they're buying up a lot of the land from the bankrupt frackers. So we're going to see, you know, a big shift. It's not going to happen tomorrow, this is a slow moving, but really important change in the way fracking is done. Because they just, the majors really haven't been that involved up to now, but they're putting their coins on the video machine.
Well, your project sounds like something I could really get into. My ancestry is Choctaw, Cherokee, and Irish from Oklahoma. I'd really like to get a square inch of our property back. So
maybe even 2 square inches.
Yeah, well, this is well, the way this property is there. Property law is complicated, and when you talk about minerals, it's even more complicated. So this is a joint tenancy. And so my 3 acres is not a specific 3 acres. It is 3 acres within a 160-acre tract. So it's just a percentage of that 160-acre tract. And so what would be transferred, if my plans to be annoying work, if I transfer this to 500 or 1,000 people, it's not a specific square inch. And it actually would be a non-specific, I think it's about 49 square feet. But lawyers get very nervous when I talk in terms of square anything, because it's a fractional interest in this 160-acre plot, which actually gives this particular approach much more power, because I will influence how this 160 acres worth of minerals is treated. So communicating this, I mean, Scoop, I assume you're in Austin, is that true?
Just outside of Austin, in the forest of Bastrop County.
Okay, yeah, but you're in Texas, and describing this project to people from Oklahoma or Texas or any traditional oil, state is so different than even describing it to people in New York, because I think it's just part of the local language and they get it much more quickly. And
most of us who have had family in Texas have inherited some oil or mineral rights. So eventually we came to understand, the ins and outs, and we had landmen on our doorsteps and that sort of thing. So, but I really get this. I mean, it's like using art to create an understanding of something that people otherwise don't really comprehend is a great use of art, really.
Well, yeah, and this is why one reason why I do consider it art, because in the beginning, when I would start talking about it, I would start with, I'm not even sure if this is art, and then I would just talk about the project. But
concept art.
Yeah, no, it's definitely conceptual work, which is very unlike me because I like to get my hands dirty. But I'm a sculptor, which means I will use any method or material that I think I need to get the desired result. So that's what's at work here. But you're right in terms of, we think if we've been lucky enough to, buy a condo or buy a house, we think as property is 2-dimensional. And here it is vastly 3-dimensional. Potentially, yeah, you have your 40 square feet, but it goes for 4,000 miles. And so that is a domain that is measurable and tradable and is the location of wealth and resources. When I see somebody who knew nothing about minerals, you see the light go off, you're like, oh, so I mean, I can talk about this as potentially the largest land art project ever. I don't know if you're, familiar with Terrell's, crater, or I'm drawing a complete blank, but so many of the land artists from the 1970s, they have these massive projects, two of which are just, well, yeah, it's much bigger than that. But I still have run into, so where I am now, I am on my like 15th lawyer who hopefully by the end of the week will chart a way forward, which is why there's not a shopping cart on the site right now. Buy your mineral rights here. I may be able to do that sometime soon, or we might have to rejigger it. I have no interest in running afoul of US or Oklahoma securities laws. But we're going to come up with a plan and hopefully that plan will be repeatable in other locations. And so, I've spent a tiny bit of time in, upstate New York, Hudson Valley, and which laps over into northeastern Pennsylvania, where there is fracking. There's no fracking. There's a moratorium on fracking in New York State. I don't know if you guys know that, which has enormous resources. There's a lot of gas, especially in New York State. And they can't get to it right now. But in Pennsylvania, they've been, fracking for a dozen years, creating all kinds of tensions. It's really destroyed communities and the relationships in those communities. So for this new now achievable shale play in the Utica Shale, I hope to go talk to some landowners and present to them my experiences. I'm not a lawyer, but I think I can talk about my experience and present a different form of resistance. And it sticks. If as currently designed, this project goes through, it could be 100-year sit-in. We need to make changes a lot quicker than that, but even it's certainly a sit-in that could last for 20 years. And if we haven't done something remarkable by then it's kind of too late. But so for, to me personally, it's an expensive project. So that's why, recruiting others and sharing it. And, I think there's something about owning something that gets in the way of something of the oil and gas business. I think it's fun. It's fun. And it's funny.
And it's art.
We've kind of run out of time now, but maybe you can come back in a couple of months and we can check in on where you are with this project and others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love that. And I saw you had a couple happy hours online. I would love
you're welcome to one of those.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
I'd love to broaden the conversation. Your friend Emily, I learned a lot just from I was unaware of her, but now I'm following her and her reporting. And so, yeah.
We have a radio show now too.
Well, let's have a big old conversation in a few months.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you guys. Thanks, John. Thanks, Scoop.
Learn more about Eliza's work and art at eevans.net. You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.